So I announced already that I was not live streaming tonight, only because of just some of the sensitive nature of what we're talking about, and I want to make sure that if I can think twice before I quickly share with the public all of my thoughts, because it's important stuff we're covering, and it's really important. I don't know, I can keep saying that again and again, and I took last week off even just to take time to even consider the text we're going over tonight. And so let's just read verse 1 of chapter 5, where it says, "My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Lend your ear to my understanding, that you may preserve discretion, and your lips may keep knowledge." And so we see once again, it's this appeal to my son. He's passionately asking him to listen, lend your ear. What I'm about to say, that. And I would say that what we're going to get into tonight is stuff that it would be easy for people to think, well, I understand it, I'm good to go, move on, next thing. And I just don't think the Bible continually warns us about the same things over and over and over again if it wasn't for the fact that we are all eligible, we're all possible to fall. We are all able to do something we never thought we'd ever do. And it's just a good reminder that we need to be watching out for these things. And so it starts 3 chapter long, essentially warning against the perils of adultery. And so it says in verse 3, "For the lips of an immoral woman drip honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil, but in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps lay hold of hell, lest you ponder her path of life. Her ways are unstable, you do not know them." It equates the lips of an immoral woman to be like honey. And it's interesting in verses 3 and 4. This is, again, the poetry of Solomon. It wasn't rhymes. It was illustrations. They would build something up and then change it all of a sudden. Or they would contrast. That was Hebrew poetry. And so it was less, how we just rhyme words. This was more about taking someone's mind on a walk and then all of a sudden changing it. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, if you weren't here, I used the illustration where I've seen on YouTube, I've even seen it live before, where someone's finger painting on this big canvas. What's he drawing? You're watching. At the very end, he flips the canvas upside down, and you see he painted Jesus with the thorns on his head, but he had painted the whole thing upside down. So the whole time you're wondering, where are we going with this? I don't get it. And then it's like, whoa! It was Jesus. And that's kind of what some of this is they build up and then they change, or they do different things, but the goal is to get your attention. And now here, her lips are honey. Honey was the sweetest thing that they knew of on earth. To the Jews, this was the sweetest thing. Her mouth is smoother than oil. And if you have to think of like slippery and smooth, oil was the smoothest substance that they knew. But in the end, she is as bitter as wormwood, the most bitter substance that they knew of, and as sharp as a two-edged sword, which the sword, and a sharp double-edged sword, was the deadliest weapon they had. Swords were even, uncommon earlier on in the Bible. We forget that, metallurgy and stuff took time to build up, and the Philistines had the edge over the Jews because they had iron and the Jews just had bronze for so long. So the sweetest, the smoothest, the bitterest, the deadliest, they're contrasting these things. How attractive this sin is, and yet how bitter and deadly it is. And it leads down to hell. So in verse 7 it says, "Therefore hear me now, my children, and do not depart from the words of my mouth. Remove your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house." And so from right there, we see our first bit of advice. And this is stuff definitely it applies, and I've got a bunch of facts I have written down here. It applies to everyone, but I would say even more importantly to the men. It says, remove yourself far from her. Be far removed from adultery. In 1 Corinthians 6:18, and if I were you, I'd write these in my Bible right next to verse 8, when it says, get away, stay far away. 1 Corinthians 16:8 starts by saying, flee sexual immorality. 2 Timothy 2:22, all twos in there. 2 Timothy 2:22, it says, flee also youthful lusts. The Bible's advice when it comes to sexual sins is to flee. And oftentimes I feel like we need like an illustration of what fleeing looks like, because fleeing is not, buckle down. Fleeing is not be tough. Fleeing is not develop tough skin that can handle temptation. Fleeing is what you do when you're in the woods and you see a grizzly bear, right? This is what you do when you see a mountain lion. You run. You don't run once you get up real close and slap it. You don't run once you determine if it's going to eat you. You run when you see it. And so that's how the Bible says to address and deal with sexual immorality, is that we are to flee from it, run from it. So that means when we see the hint of it, when we see the signs of it, that's when we start running. It's not something that we wait and see if it's as bad as it looks as it's going to get. It's innocent right now. No, we flee at the first sight. Why? Verse 9 through 11. Lest you give your honor to others, your years to the cruel one, lest aliens be filled with your wealth, and your labors go to the house of a foreigner, and you mourn at last when your flesh and your body are consumed. One act of adultery can destroy all honor you have desired to build up and worked hard for your entire life. The best quote anyone could ever have for this is the one that Billy Graham often said he lived by, which was that every morning he woke up and he prayed, knowing that that day he could commit a single act that would render years of good, godly, faithful service totally to waste. He knew that one thing, I could mess up one time, and forevermore people would throw away my books. They would say, well, he's the one who went off and did that. That's the idea, is that a lot is on the line. It is like life and death. Some things you just don't play around with because the cost is too costly. And I think the big message for us is to come to the realization what is on the line and how much I need to really realize, this could be me. And I must think about this ahead of time, lest I lose all my honor. You lose your years. What do you mean? Well, you spent years building up a ministry. You spent years witnessing to your family, showing them that you're a Christian now and you're different. And then all of a sudden, when you think that they were just about to come, boom, a single event, one thing changes it all. Aliens getting your wealth, your labors to the foreigner. I mean, it's basically saying you worked for something, someone else is going to get it, right? Aliens, foreigners, the idea is you're trying to build something up and someone else is going to get all the glory and receive it because you've lost it all. You have forfeited what you've worked for. And when your flesh and your body are consumed, and I think everyone here is pretty well aware that STDs are just rampant in the world these days. It's a crazy just how many people have an STD, and yet people often don't take the time to think. If the world practiced sex within marriage the way the Bible says to, STDs would be gone within a generation, almost entirely. right? They can be transmitted other ways. But for the most part, we could annihilate all STDs by simply obeying the Bible, by simply saving ourselves until marriage. Verse 12, it says, how you're going to say, this is going to be a result. Where are you going to be at if you fall into this? How have I hated instruction and my heart despised correction? I have not obeyed the voice of my teachers, nor inclined my ear to those who instructed me. I was on the verge of total ruin in the midst of the assembly of the congregation. And he's saying, like, why didn't I listen? And so again, I pushed and emphasized people coming tonight, and I mean, I'd take anyone who'd come and hear, because the idea is Paul says that he had peace before God because he knew without a shadow of a doubt he had not hidden or held back anything from his hearers. He gave them the full counsel of God. And that's where I'm thinking to myself, it's like, I just want to really express to the couples, to the parents of the couples. You know, I thought a little bit of Roberta and Stan, and it's like, well, maybe Roberta and Stan feel like they're beyond, committing adultery, but their kids aren't. And that's the reality, is that as parents, we need to be praying for our children. We need to be counseling our children. And yes, all of you, all of us, need to be calling each other out and holding each other accountable. If we agree these are the standards we want to live by, when you watch your brother start doing something a little foolish, you tell him. And you see the girl carrying on the conversations with the man who's not her husband, we tell her. Our kids, our friends, other church members from other churches, we're going to hold people accountable, because no one wants to hear the words, how I've hated instruction and my heart despised correction. I have not obeyed the voice of my teachers. It's the idea is, I knew better. Any Christian who falls into this sin, they knew better. And they knew better. But somewhere along the line, pride, apathy, ignorance, something gets in there, and we start doing the things we know we ought not do. Verse 15 to 18, it says, drink water from your own cistern and running water from your own well. Should your fountains be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be only your own and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice with the wife of your youth. I'll mention now, Enrique and I have been talking, and he has volunteered, or I have voluntold him. It was a combo effort. We wanted to see some of the men going through what's called Every Man's Battle. It's a book, been around for over 20 years, been pretty good. I read it when I was in college. And it just is a book with lots of practical encouragement and wise sayings, wisdom, about how to fight for purity. And so we're going to be working on getting some copies of the book, and not doing like a class where people all have to, because we've had a lot of commitments, but something where it's just men get the book, start working on it, and hold each other accountable to getting through it. Ladies, if your husband's not here or you know someone, this is worthwhile. And part of it, something I loved from the book, and one of the biggest things, in fact, one of the few things, 10, 15 years later, that still really stood out to me, is this concept here we just read in Proverbs. Should your fountains be dispersed abroad and streams of water in the streets, right? Let your fountain be blessed. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. You see, Jesus said, you've heard it's been told to those of old, you shall not commit adultery, but I say unto you that to anyone look after a woman, to look at her and to lust after her in his heart, he's committing adultery in his heart. 100% of my sexual attention belongs to Nicole. Every bit of it. I don't have any room, I ought not have any room to appreciate another woman in that way. Because water from my own cistern, water from my own fountain. What it is imagine, you got a river. If you disperse little bits, this way and that way, this way and that way. Anyone ever fight with plumbing and like low pressure? Because there's leaks. Why isn't there any water coming out of here? Well, someone turned on the washing machine, and so now your shower is just dying down. That's your love life. That's your love. That is the energy that belongs to your spouse. This is for men and women. This is the energy that belongs to your spouse and only for them. And if you spend it elsewhere, even just looking, it takes away from her. When you begin to appreciate other women's looks, it then becomes a comparison to what your wife doesn't look like. When you look at a guy's rock hard six-pack abs, you don't appreciate the protective coating your husband has on his. And so the idea is that it's something that we are supposed to be guarding and protecting. And this takes us to a very familiar subject in America, and again, just something that we all should be aware of. Young and old, married and single, man and woman, things we should be aware of. The NFL, the NBA, and the MLB, Major League Baseball, those industries combined bring in less money every year in America than pornography does. You have to think about that. Pornography brings in more money than the NFL, NBA, and MLB combined. Here are some facts worth knowing and hearing so that we can wrestle and consider this great pandemic that plagues our world. 47% of families in the United States reported that pornography is a problem in their home. Let's just call that half, right? That means out of everyone you know, statistically speaking, half of them say that it's a problem in their home. That doesn't mean it's just happening. It's a problem that's being identified. Pornography increases the marital infidelity rate by more than 300%. If someone regularly views pornography, they are 3 times more likely to cheat on their spouse. 11 is the average age that a child is first exposed to pornography in America. 94% of children will see porn by the age of 14. And I will guarantee people that those who are here who are younger than me, who are close to my age and younger than me, we can all attest to that being true. The age of the internet, the age of the smartphone. 56% of American divorces involve one party having an obsessive interest with pornographic websites. So half of divorces, people say that porn played a role. Moving a little closer to home, 68% of church-going men and over 50% of pastors view porn on a regular basis. 76% of 18 to 24-year-olds actively search for porn. That's 3 out of 4. And looking around, we've got 4 men in that age group here at least. Now, I'm not pointing fingers at our own church members, but this is the reality. It's the reality of the problem. 59% of pastors said that married men seek their help for porn. 33% of women aged 25 and under search for porn at least once a month. Only 13% of self-identified Christian women say they've never watched porn. So only 1 out of 10 Christian women have said they've never watched it. And 87% say they have. Almost at the end, 55% of married men and 25% of married women say they watch porn at least once a month. And here's the 3 that kind of just are taking things back to home and wrapping it back around to why we brought up that book. 57% of pastors say porn addiction is the most damaging issue in their congregation. 69% say it has adversely impacted the church. Yet only 7% of pastors say their church has a program to help people struggling with pornography. If it's this big of an issue, it probably should get dealt with. Dealt with isn't laying the hammer down and telling everyone how bad they are for struggling with sin that obviously a whole lot of people struggle with. There's a reason why so much of the Bible is warning about sexual temptations and sexual sin and fleeing from it. And it's just a different age we live in. When Paul wrote to Corinth, you could walk down any side street and pick up a prostitute really easily and no one would bat an eye because that was part of the religious practices of the day and time. But Today, you can pick up pornography really easy because it's just there in your pocket everywhere you go. As people say, 50 years ago, at least you had to go out of your way to go and acquire it. Today, not so much. And remember, pornography isn't sin. Looking with lust is sin. And so that includes everything from bikinis to whatever else it may be that catches our eyes. And so, yeah, I'm going to encourage. I asked Enrique if you just help out with that and just getting guys together. Hey, have you guys, people who've already read that book before or people who are interested, like, yeah, I should pick up the book and start reading it. Maybe get a group chat going where guys can just talk to each other about stuff. There is many men in our church body who I know who have accountability apps on their phones. And I am the accountability partner for multiple people. And I've got people who have accountability on my phone. And it's just the idea is like my wife sees anything that goes on my phone if she wants to, because I don't want to be tempted down these paths. I'm going to read one quote before we move on. Some of you already have heard this quote before. My experience with pornography is that once you become addicted to it and look at it, this is a kind of an addiction, like other kinds of addiction. I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of materials. And like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder and harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement until you reach the point where pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it. Now, while this could be the story of many of men who have fallen into adultery, that was the testimony of Ted Bundy 12 hours or so before his execution. And if anyone is unfamiliar with the serial killer, Ted Bundy, he did give his life to Jesus, and that was Dr. Dobson who interviewed him right before he passed away. He was fast-tracked to heaven via execution, but he was a mass murderer who was, raping women and murdering and burying them at Snoqualmie Pass. So the point is, my mom went to a party that Ted Bundy was at. More you know. That's a fact you can just have for later. But it's not innocent. Just looking never gets you anywhere. And I've just found that, as we read earlier, can a man take fire to his bosom and his clothes not be burned? That's the idea. Is somewhere along the line, people think we can play with fire and not be burned by it. It's just not true. FYI, a lot of tonight's in chapter 5, but we're going to pick things up if we get going. But I got a little bit more before we finish up the chapter. Verse 19, it says, as a loving deer and a graceful doe, let's back up to 18. It'll make more sense. Let your fountain be blessed. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. As a loving deer and a graceful doe, let her breasts satisfy you at all times. Always be enraptured with her love. For why should you, my son, be enraptured by an immoral woman and be embraced in the arms of a seductress? Now, this is my last big breaking away point, because there's a lot of Bible about this subject, and my job is simply to teach it, and it's for us to wrestle with it and determine how obedience looks. So I'm going to try and break down some of this stuff, what seemed the most logical and most biblical way I could. And it wraps a bit around the verse, let her breasts satisfy you at all times, which, as a guy, it's hard not to chuckle to think there's all these points on this point, but right off the bat, breasts are satisfying to men. I know you know that, and this is why I said this message was one I didn't want to go live with. But I want to take a second, because it says, let your husband be satisfied by them. And this takes me to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. So I'm going to flip to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and you probably should have 1 Corinthians chapter 7 written in your Bible next to that verse. I was going to start in verse 3, but I'm going to go to verse 2 because it's sandwiched in the middle of another topic, which is for another day. But nevertheless, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. Let the husband render to his wife the affection due to her, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another except with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now, let's break down a few things. We all know that as Christians, we are not to stumble our brothers and our sisters. That's our job, to not stumble other people, to not cause them to sin. To stumble means to provoke to sin. Now, at the end of the day, each of us are responsible for our choices, right? So if someone goes off and does something sinful and foolish, it's their fault. And yet, we most definitely could push them down that road. An example I thought of in my head is simply this. Aside of self-defense and some other, scenarios, we know that if you're angry, it would be sinful to punch someone in the face, right? I mean, this is the idea. I'm not allowed to just punch someone because I'm angry at them. Jesus says, turn the other cheek. And the idea with that was not self-defense, but was that when you're getting backhanded, when you are being insulted, that you are supposed to just take it and move on. You're not supposed to punch someone because you're angry. Now, if Kyle ever punched me in the face, it would be sinful. And he'd be in trouble with God for punching me. Yet, if I began to insult him, see, I know Kyle very personally, and one-on-one, I could bring up stories that he never would want me to bring up. I could bring up insecurities and things I know about him. I then could attack his wife and start talking about the things I know about her. And then I could start going at his kids one by one, looking at the things that might not be perfect about them and just drilling it. Now, if Kyle punched me, it'd be sinful. But would you blame him? If you drive it so far that the person finally cracks, I am guilty of that. Paul realizes that people do have a lack of self-control. That's why it says at the end of the section we read, because of your lack of self-control, that we are tempted by things and tempted by sin. And so the advice that the Bible gives is not let your spouse be tempted. Because if their libido is here or here or here or here, whatever it may be, the Bible actually says that we should be freely giving each other those needs that the other person in the relationship has. Now, this very easily, I think the point blank teaching, I don't even need to teach it, right? I think if you want to go stereotypically, men often have a higher sex drive, and this could be an easy verse that you can just beat your wife with and explain to her why she needs to meet your needs. And yet, that's never how the whole Bible works at all, right? When your spouse has a flaw or a problem, you don't beat them with, this is what the Bible says you're supposed to be like and what you're supposed to do. But the truth is, if a wife withholds herself from her husband to where it provokes him, it's his fault if he makes a mistake and he goes and looks at pornography. It's his fault if he falls into an affair. But the Bible is giving us a warning. Please don't give them an excuse. Please don't push them that direction if you know what their needs are. And in speaking of needs, because it talks about affection due, right? May I please make it very clear to the men in the room, very often men feel like they have a need for sexual fulfillment. And very often women have a very deep need for emotional fulfillment. And if you don't provide that need for her, she too will be tempted to go meet that need somewhere else. And if you won't talk to her, there might be another man who will. And often that's the doorway through her heart is the doorway to meet those needs you wanted met the whole time. So this is a two-way street. We all have needs. And as Christians, our bodies are not our own. If my wife wants my ears and my mouth, she can have them. And I need to give them freely to her. That is the teaching in 1 Corinthians 7. It's something that we need to be considering of the other person because they're weak. And we need to let her breasts satisfy you at all times. On that note again, some of this stuff's a given, but I'm just going to have a peace with God tonight that I'm going to say I've never not said it. I could always point someone back to that one message. Breasts are a sexual thing, and men are attracted to them, and they are meant for husbands. And that's the only person in the whole wide world who has a right to derive satisfaction from a woman's breasts, which means a couple things. I'm thinking like for the single young ladies or single ladies in general, right? Please, older men, older women, teach it to your sisters, teach it to the young ladies you know, right? Obviously, touching is very, very, very off limits until that's a husband who's touching them. But looking is also off limits. And so then to the ladies, I would say, help the guys out. If you know it's something that the Bible says is attractive to men, then we ought to do what we can to try and not provoke and stumble and lead people to sin. Be conscious about what you are wearing. Be conscious about how you show off your body. I've said it once and I'll say it again. I fell in love with my wife at the swimming pond because she was the only girl out of this church group that went down there who was wearing a modest bathing suit. And instantly, my respect for her went through the roof. And I began to pursue her. I asked her out. I engaged her. I married her. Because I found a woman who I thought had standards and she understood these principles. So that was a big attraction for me. And for the single men, that should be an attraction for you, something you should be considering. All right, let's see here. I guess it's just one last emphasis. I'm just looking at my list because I think I've covered it all. To the men, it's let her breasts satisfy you at all times and always be enraptured with her love. So once again, I think I started to say it and maybe I forgot. But in that book, Every Man's Battle, something I loved and respect out of that book was the idea where men were saying, I used to look at other women. I used to struggle with pornography. I used to struggle with this and that. And those things maybe not appreciate my wife and her body. But when God helped me develop eyes for her and her alone, every freckle, stretch mark, imperfection, they became mine. They became the little quirks and the things that were mine. It's my wife, and it's mine to appreciate. And they developed a deeper appreciation for their wife because they had eyes for her alone. And so the Bible is very clear. You know, God will bless your marriage. And I will give one last bit and then we will get out of here. Is definitely for the younger couples. A good prayer for every husband and every wife to pray involving sex is to ask God to help you guys meet at some mutual place. It's a good prayer. Lord, help us become like-minded towards sex. Maybe that means increasing my interest. Maybe it means decreasing my interest. But Lord, bring us together where we can enjoy this union that you created and you made beautiful, something that we can both enjoy together, equally and similarly. And pray specifically that he changes you. You pray for you, that God changes you. And if your spouse prays the same, hopefully there'll be some wonderful things that will come out of that. So all this said, we're moving on. This theme of adultery continues on, but that was a lot of my, what I'd say is practical application. So he now warns, he says, the ways of man, verse 21, are before the eyes of the Lord. He ponders all his paths. His own iniquities entrap the wicked man, and he's caught in the cords of his sin. He shall die for lack of instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he shall go astray. Verse 22 somewhat summarizes now the small change in theme for the beginning of chapter 6. Chapter 6 seems like it's going off course, but he's actually just giving us side stories and examples of what it looks like to be entrapped by sin. When you get stuck in the sin and you're now ensnared with it. So verses 1 through 5, it's being trapped by a promise or trapped by something you did. It says in chapter 6, my son, if you become surety for your friend, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, you are snared by the words of your mouth. You are taken by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, and deliver yourself, for you have come into the hand of your friend. Go and humble yourself. Plead with your friend. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. What it's saying here is actually a teaching, and so it's using it as an illustration, but it's a Bible teaching about co-signing on loans. It's saying, don't be a surety for a friend. What that means is, do not be the co-signer on a loan where if they fail, you're now responsible for them. And it's actually saying, if you get yourself stuck in this position, you should beg to get out of it. I think it's a good biblical principle. In general, you can pray about however God leads you as you help your kids or whatever else it may be. But it's saying, that people should be responsible for themselves. You need to get out of there where you're not the one who's going to bite the bullet if they mess up. And so the bigger teaching, though, is this was someone getting trapped by a promise they made. They opened their mouth actively, and now they're trapped by it. So he's saying, get out of it. Now, being trapped by not doing stuff. That was being trapped by actively doing something. Here's being trapped by being inactive. Go to the ant, verse 6, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which have no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer, gathers her food in the harvest. Oh, how long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your poverty come upon you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. What this is saying is that we can go out and actively do something and get trapped by it. But doing nothing can also get us trapped because we weren't preparing, we weren't planning, and we were just being passive. And then all of a sudden, problems come. This is where you need your Dave Ramsey emergency fund right here, right? I mean, this is what we're talking about. Like, there's the literal teaching that we need to be preparing for stuff. Laziness, in the end, eventually things come to the collision point. And then all of a sudden, you're in a bad place because you weren't preparing and you were just taking life on cruise control. And then all of a sudden, bills come. I love Dave Ramsey's little speech in his first introductory lesson where he's just like, honey, did you know Christmas is in December this year? And then the summer's over. It's like, honey, the kids grew again. We need more clothes. Where did this come? It's a emergency. And he talks about people always having these emergencies. Like, did you know the cars need oil changes? And all of a sudden the engine blew. Like, no, we should plan. We know this stuff happens. We know tires go bad. We know kids grow. We know anniversaries, weddings, birthdays. So that's the financial, practical side of planning ahead. But this is, again, back to this idea of adultery. He's saying you can actively go out and mess up and get trapped by it. You can also be passive and not be ready when the day comes. And because you've just been taking life easy, not thinking about protecting yourself, boom, it comes and hits. And ultimately, these things for the unbeliever can be trapped eternally. Verses 12 on down to 15. A worthless person, a wicked man, walks with a perverse mouth. He winks with his eyes, shuffles his feet, points with his fingers. Perversity is in his heart. He devises evil continually. He sows discord. Therefore his calamity shall come suddenly. suddenly he shall be broken without remedy. And it's just saying, the wicked will have a sudden entrapment come upon them when they die. It will come, and they will be judged, and we don't need to worry about what they're getting away with, because every sin gets paid for. You know that? I mean, every sin from all eternity will be paid for. It's either paid for at the cross, and people receive that payment, or it's paid for in hell. There's only two ways. So either those wicked people we don't like are going to get what's coming to them, or Jesus is going to get what was coming to them. And we understand that that was God's choice to save them, and glory be to God for saving sinners like us. And so now it's kind of just reminding us, these wicked people, what are wicked things that God hates? So 16 and 19 is like a little extended study on these wicked people and their ways. And this is one of the pieces of poetry we see in Proverbs. There are 6 things the Lord hates, yes, 7 are an abomination to him. Verse 16. What it's saying is, here are 6 things that are bad, but God wants you to understand the 7th one is more hated in the eyes of God than the first 6. And some of those are pretty bad, so it's supposed to build up the significance. Verse 17, what does God hate? A proud look, pride, a lying tongue, lying, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift to running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies. And that means number 7 is one who sows discord among brethren. Above the lying, above hands shedding innocent blood, it says God hates it when people stir up trouble amongst the brethren. When people create tension between us, and someone comes into this mix and starts turning us against each other, that is of Satan. God hates it more than murder. He's saying, no. My kids, the ones I love, I want them to love each other. And let's be honest, parents, I mean, how much do you just wish your kids were best friends, right? I mean, that they just love each other. They never are, right? And so you got to really work with them. Stop hitting your sister. Stop pulling their hair. Stop biting. But truly, it's our desire that, I mean, wouldn't it be awesome? Like, wouldn't it just bless your heart if you just could sit back and watch your children open the door for each other and love on each other? And I know all you have kids, and you're all kids as bad as sinners as my kids. So, I mean, we're all in the same boat on this one, right? But that's what God is saying with us. Oh, how he would love to just see us getting along, bearing each other's burdens, praying for each other, rejoicing with those who rejoice, and weeping with those who weep. Romans 12:15, I think. So we read verses 20 to 28 this morning. It's getting back to the adultery topic, and we looked it over. And he was building up, listen to me, because I'm trying to warn you how to stay out of this adultery thing. And so 29, I was going to do 29 this morning because that's where the paragraph ends, but it just seemed more, starting, maybe it belongs down by 30. So 29 is, so he who goes into his neighbor's wife, whoever touches her shall not be innocent. People do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he is starving. Verse 31, yet when he is found, he must restore 7-fold. He may have to give up all the substance of his house. What it's saying there, before moving forward, is there are some people who sin and you kind of get it. My provoking Kyle scenario. You understand why Joe had it coming. Kyle shouldn't have done it, but Joe had it coming. And so you get it. A thief who steals because he's starving. And it says he has to pay the penalty. He will pay the fine, but we get it. Yeah, you were literally starving. You stole a loaf of bread. We understand. We can be a little bit compassionate. So now it's contrasting that. Verse 32, whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding. He who does so destroys his own soul. Wounds and dishonor he will get, and his reproach will not be wiped away. For jealousy is a husband's fury. Therefore, he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will accept no recompense. nor will he be appeased though you may give many gifts. So I think that last bit is specifically the idea of someone sleeping with a married woman, that her husband, there ain't no putting out that fire. Like, there's going to be a very angry man, and there's no compassion on the adulterer. No one ever feels sorry for the person who sleeps with a married person. And so that's the scenario. It's painting this picture for us. It's trying to get us to wrap our minds around how serious of an issue this is. And so he gives one last very picturesque scenario. Now he's going to paint a picture of a story to one more time drive it home. My son, chapter 7, keep my words, treasure my commands within you, keep my commands and live. And my law is the apple of your eye. And the word apple, it means the center point of your eye, the pupil. Literally, it was the same Hebrew word for a pupil and the apple. Bind them to your fingers, write them on a tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding your nearest kin, that they may keep you from the immoral woman, from the seductress who flatters with her words. Might I say once more, maybe we will not fall into adultery. But once again, definitely for the men I know, and even the women, pornography, looking with lust, checking out girls' bikinis, being on the wrong show on Netflix or Prime Video or whatever. Once you get enough of God in you, you get to that place. You cannot enjoy church because of the guilt you bear. And you realize you've messed up. And it's amazing how you just lose interest in God because you can't really face him face to face. You can't face your brothers and sisters face to face because you know what you're doing, you know it's wrong, and you get torn up about it. And what does Satan want you to do? He wants you to hide. He wants you to pull away. He wants you to not talk about it, not tell, not confess your sins, because Satan knows if we confess our sins to one another, we can pray for another that you may be healed, James 5:16. That's what Satan knows, and so we pull away. We don't tell anyone. And we lose our interest, we lose our zeal. And yet, like a dog to its vomit, we can go back to that same filth again and again, but at the same time, God's got our heart, and so we cannot really enjoy that either. It's like we're stuck between two worlds. I can't enjoy the world because God keeps convicting me, because you're born again. You can have these struggles and temptations and be very born again, but you're walking in the flesh. And yet when you come over here, you can't fully enjoy God's presence because of the fact you know you have these sins you have not confessed to him or to the people you need to be confessing to, i.e. your wife. And so you're stuck. And it just sits there, and it can muster for a year because you know you have unrepentant sin because you've been keeping it to yourself. As we read this morning, if we confess our sin, he's faithful and just to forgive us of our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. It's something we need to deal with, and I just don't want to lose any of you. I don't want to see this hit our church. I don't want to see it hit the marriages. One of my nearest friends, pastor, told me during this COVID time, he's like, I've had 3 couples walk away from each other during COVID. They went crazy, just being at home together. But he's like, these are people, some of these were people from the beginning, like they've been with me for years, and they're losing it. People you'd never think would walk away from each other. But when Satan gets a foothold on our life, he can tear it all down. And we have an almost magical, simple solution, and it's called confession, repentance, and seeking the blood of Jesus to cleanse us from all unrighteousness, and having a pure heart and a pure conscience. There are times that I have felt dips in my spiritual walk because I've had unrepentant sin in my life. And this is not like, disqualifying from ministry stuff, but it's stuff I know God is saying clearly, you need to do this. I'm like, yeah, I'll get around to it, God. And I just feel a lack of power, a lack of passion, oftentimes it's like I feel like I get a blip of supernatural power on Sundays, and it's like, God, you just do that because it's for them, not for me. And I'll go back into a valley, it seems like, and then finally I deal with it. And then it's like, man, it feels so good to say, God, is there anything right now that I have not surrendered to you, that I have not confessed, that I have not dealt with? And if you feel that peace of saying, no, there's nothing, like the same normal stuff from every day, but it's like, I'm clean. It gives you power. It lets you move forward. And so he paints this picture, verse 6. For at the window of my house I looked through my lattice, and I saw among the simple, I perceived among the youths a young man devoid of understanding. Passing along the street near her corner, he took the path to her house. In the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night. Please note that Solomon he's painting a picture as if he's watching this take place. Two things he warns about: where the guy goes. So we all should be careful where we go. What websites, what movie shows, what anything. And also when he goes. He goes in the night. You know, there's certain places that are like okay to go during the daytime, but you'd never go there at nighttime because it's dangerous to go out at night in these certain areas. Same thing. Certain apps on your phone, you might be fine during the day on, but it's at nighttime where you probably want to avoid them. It's at nighttime when it's like, I should probably just put that away. Nighttime, I don't seem to use it as efficiently and effectively for the Lord. And there a woman met him with the attire of a harlot and a crafty heart. She was loud and rebellious. Her feet would not stay at home. At times she was outside, at times in the open square, lurking at every corner. So she caught him and kissed him with an impudent face and said to him, I have peace offerings with me. Today I have paid my vows. So I came out to meet you, diligently to seek your face, and I have found you. I have spread my bed with tapestry, colored coverings of Egyptian linen, perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. For my husband is not home. He has gone on a long journey. He has taken a bag of money with him and will come home on the appointed day. It's a picture, but definitely some very key specifics in here. You see, the man was lurking where he shouldn't have been, when he shouldn't have been. But he wasn't looking for anything. He wasn't seeking it out. He wasn't, in his mind, I was just passing through, and I'm a pretty strong Christian dude. I know I serve at church. I can hold my own. And she caught him and kissed him. And Satan is willing to throw the most intense temptation in front of us at the time we least expect it, yet we're where we shouldn't be, when we shouldn't be there. Then all of a sudden, boom, it hits you. The evil day. We spoke about this back with David and Bathsheba. When temptation and opportunity and desire meet at the same time. You know what your desires are. You know where you'd be weak. The temptation is the thing being placed in front of you. Sometimes your temptations for your desires come, but there's no opportunity. I can't do that right now. I'd get caught. But this woman says, no, my husband, he's gone. I'm telling you, you could check this out, clear your history, and no one would be the wiser. You could do this and no one would ever catch you. You're on a business trip. You're in a different state with people you'll never see again, and the man is actually talking to you. He actually seems to care about what you say. He gives you attention your husband doesn't. The woman thinks you're funny. Your wife thinks you're pathetic. She doesn't laugh at your jokes, but this guy does. Or this woman does. That's the scenario, is all of a sudden someone comes out of nowhere. You won't get caught. She starts describing all this beautiful stuff. And let me just say right here in verse 18, let us delight ourselves with love. Or before that it said, come let us take our fill of love until morning. All night long? My wife wouldn't do that anymore. But that's the idea, right? And I'm just saying that for a story here. I'm saying it, not a personal statement. But that's the thing, is that it's like, this is what hits you. Oh yeah, we were real passionate there at the beginning, but then the kids came. And love kind of went, That's the idea, is the temptation hits you. Satan knows your desire, so he will be there to provide for you opportunity and the temptation. He'll put the person there, he'll remove all your obstructions, and he'll open the door for you to do it. And you find yourself doing what you'd never expect. So with her enticing speech, verse 21, she causes him to yield. With her flattering lips, she seduces him. Immediately he went after her as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks, till an arrow struck his liver. As a bird hastens to the snare, he did not know it would cost his life. I used to like a lot of movies. I don't watch very much anymore, and so I try not to refer to all the movies I used to watch before I had the same convictions I have now. But in a movie I watched long ago, good guys, bad guys fighting, this and that, and one of the bad guys, the villains, was a butcher. And there's a scene in the movie where he's just talking about how one reason he was such a deadly fighter was because being a butcher, he knew all the body parts. And so he knew exactly what would be a death blow and what would be, this is a slow death, fast death. The liver is a death blow. It's just, I think he specifically mentions that in this movie. Is like, you get someone in the liver, it's done, right? Won't be fast. That's the other one. It's like, get him in the liver, one little hit with a knife, they're dead. They're not coming back from that. And it's not going to be a fast death. They'll slowly die. And that's the idea here with the arrow to the liver. God also knows it's a death blow. He gets hit. It's not a quick one. It's a slow and agonizing death. He went like an ox to the slaughter. Now, therefore, God speaking to you tonight, listen to me, my children. Pay attention to the words of my mouth. Do not let your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths. For she has cast down many wounded, and all who were slain by her were strong men. Her house is the way to hell, descending to the chambers of death. Any of you guys here tonight think you're kind of spiritual? Strong men? Raise your hands. I'm a strong Christian man. Daniel's thinking about it. Yeah, I saw Brock with the cough. Good. But here's the thing. Many strong men have fallen to wicked sin they never thought. There are multiple pastors whom I used to listen to regularly who are no longer pastoring because they have fallen to adultery. These pastors know the Bible better than you. They know it better than me. They've had higher and better spiritual experiences than most any of us in the room. They were strong men, but they fell. The Bible says, when you think you're strong, right, take heed lest you fall. I just keep driving this home because if you've got some years left on you where you think, this is something that, I'm just saying, if there's a chance, there's a chance. God can woo someone away and they may never commit sexual intercourse with another person, but they can still steal someone's heart. And people get divorced in their 60s and 70s and older too, because maybe it's not a sex thing, but it's just their heart goes to someone else because they develop a relationship and they move on because someone else fulfills the needs that the other person wasn't. And sex is a big drive, but so is the emotional needs of a woman, and so is these other needs that different people have, and we're all different. We all have different needs. 5 Love Languages, great book. If you're married and you haven't read it, read it. And so there is all that. We read a little bit, and I'm going to see how much I can fast forward through some of this because I wanted to get through 9. We'll just move and we'll just see what happens. But 9 finishes the section of the first section of Proverbs. And so I does not wisdom cry out? And a lot of this actually is really just a beautiful picture. So let's read and see. And understanding lift up her voice. She takes her stand on the top of a high hill, beside the way where the paths meet. She cries out by the gates, at the entry of the city, to the entrance of the doors, to you, O men, I call, and my voice is to the sons of men. O you simple ones, understand prudence. O you fools, be of an understanding heart. Listen, for I will speak of excellent things, and from the opening of my lips will come right things. For my mouth will speak truth. Wickedness is an abomination to my lips, and the words of my mouth are with righteousness. Nothing crooked or perverse is in them. They are all plain to him who understands, and right to those who find knowledge. Receive my instruction, and not silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold or refined gold, pure gold. For wisdom is better than rubies. And all these things one may desire cannot be compared with her. God is willing to give you a wisdom that is better than anything this world can give. And so it goes on in verse 12, I, wisdom, dwell with prudence and find out knowledge and discretion. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil. Now, chapter 9, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Chapter 1, what is it? Verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is a fountain. There's a lot of verses about the benefits and the blessings of fearing the Lord. What is the fear of the Lord? It's to hate evil. It's to have a hatred for sin. Recently, I feel like God gave me a fresh vision and a reopening of my eyes of a hatred for sin and breaking my heart, because as you see sinners, you realize they are trapped by the snares of sin and of Satan. We are exposed to the disease of sin that's passed down to every generation. And as you begin to hate sin, I think in many ways I think some people get very judgmental looking. And I think there's a self-righteousness there that is not of God. And truly, as you really, truly hate sin, your heart actually becomes more compassionate towards the people who are trapped by it. As you really hate sin, you become more heartbroken over sinners. Ask God to help you hate evil. You see, it's not, Lord, I struggle with anger. Please help me stop being angry. Lord, I struggle with lust. Help me stop lusting. No, Lord, help me hate sin with a passion. Help me take the things that used to tempt me and me be disgusted by them, to realize they have ruined lives. They've torn apart marriages. They've torn apart families. They've killed children. They've done all these things, and it's sin that does that. God, you help me develop a hatred for sin. And that's the beginning of wisdom. It's the beginning of knowledge. It's a fountain. It's all these wonderful things. Pray that God would help you truly hate sin, not just stop sinning, not just be better. No, help me hate sin, God, and help me have compassion on those who are still struggling their way out of it. Pride and arrogance and the evil way. It's to hate evil, pride and arrogance, and the evil way, and the perverse mouth I hate. Verse 14, counsel is mine and sound wisdom. I am understanding, I have strength. By me, kings reign and rulers decree justice. By me, princes rule and nobles and all the judges of the earth. I love those who love me, and those who seek me diligently will find me. Now, this is wisdom speaking. It'd be a great verse to speak of God, and often we can definitely see where God is personified in this, but it is wisdom. And in James, he makes it very clear in chapter 1, if you ask for wisdom, God will give it. He doesn't hold back when people honestly, God, I just want to know how to follow you. And so, riches and honor are with me, verse 18. Enduring riches and righteousness. My fruit is better than gold, yes, than fine gold. My revenue than choice silver. I traverse the way of righteousness in the midst of the paths of justice, that I may cause those who love me to inherit wealth, that I may fill their treasuries. You see the funny thing? People desire gold, end up crashing and burning. People who seek godly wisdom very oftentimes end up well financially. I'm not talking about Learjets, but if you follow biblical wisdom concerning money, you will do well. You will do well if you listen to what God has to say about money and just seek wisdom. He'll get you guys taken care of. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way. Before his works of old I have established from everlasting. From the beginning, before there was ever an earth. When there was no depths, I was brought forth, and when there were no fountains abounding with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills, I was brought forth. 26. While as yet he had not made the earth or the fields, or the primal dust of the world, when he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he drew the circle of the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limit so that the waters would not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him as a master craftsman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing with his inhabited world, and my delight was with the sons of men. Talking about the wisdom that was involved in creation. Again, it's a stretch if you're trying to be a strict hermeneutical Bible expositor. But, Christ, all things were made through him, by him, for him. We can look at Colossians, you can look in John 1. So you can kind of see a tie into Christ here. But ultimately, it is this idea of wisdom, that the earth was made wisely. Do you want to hear my personal belief on an unwise way to make an earth? Is to have all these things have to die before you finally get to Adam and Eve. I just don't see wisdom in evolution. I see wisdom in God creating all these different animals with weird, unique characteristics that never would have popped up on their own. I see wisdom and beauty and majesty in mountain flowers that grow on hills that will never be seen by one man's eye, yet God sees. The little things, the big things. Stars in the sky just for us to enjoy. It was made wisely, purposefully, and intentionally. Now therefore listen to me, my children. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Hear instruction, be wise, do not disdain it. Blessed the man who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at the doorposts of my doors. For whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor in the Lord. But he who sins against me wrongs his own soul, and all who hate me love death. So, I will say this about chapter 9, because chapter 9 can be summarized, but it's broken into 3 chunks. And I just want to explain the chunks to you to keep us on my normal max limit of keeping it under an hour and 15 max. I try and keep it to an hour, but things happen. Verses 1 to 6 are wisdom making an offer. Verses 13 to 18 is folly and foolishness making their offer. And in the middle is kind of showing that there's logic. You do this, there's consequences. You do that, there's consequences. It's just you might draw a note in your Bible. Verse 4, the 4th verse of the wisdom section, is identical to verse 16, the 4th verse of the foolishness or folly section. Both of them, so I'm kind of jumping in this chapter. Verse 1, Wilson built her house on these pillars, but she's going to cry out from the city in verse 3. Back in verse 13, 14, you see that she's going to cry out or call out in verse 15. She sits at the door of her house in verse 14. What's interesting is it says that foolishness sits at her door and calls everyone to her. Whereas wisdom is saying, I'm going out into the streets. I'm going out looking for people. God is actively trying to get our attention. Satan keeps luring us away. And so, wisdom's offering, look what I have, it's good. And folly, so there's the last 2 verses, 5 and 6 and 17 and 18. Wisdom says, come eat my bread, drink of the wine I have mixed. And then again, verse 17, folly is saying, stolen water is sweet. Bread eaten in secret is pleasant. And so it's that lustful lure into that direction. Mixed wine. This is just a fun fact for the nerds. Often the Jews spiced and actually did stuff with their wine, so that could be part of the mixing. But this is just a reference that, again, some of you guys who are the big note takers, Passover wine by prescription was 3 parts water, 1 part wine. Passover wine, 3 parts water, 1 part wine. It was only a quarter wine, and you have to do the math there with whatever the alcoholic content of wine was. Second Maccabees, from the Apocrypha, 2 Maccabees 15:39 makes reference on how unmixed wine was distasteful. Now, the Jews recognized the book of Maccabees as just a book about stories of what was going on in the day and age just before Christ. It was the attitude of the people that pure straight wine was distasteful because people got drunk off of it. And they realized people drinking pure straight wine, they had an intent and a purpose behind it. And so back then, you can't speak for every instance, every scenario, but very often the wine was watered down. Again, Passover wine, 3 parts water, 1 part wine. In Proverbs 23, verses 30 and 31, it talks about how you need to avoid the mixed wine, but that's a different word for mixed wine. It's actually a specific word, not mixed wine, but one word. And it's talking about like mixing it stronger. Avoid the wine that's mixed stronger. Watch out for the people who are doing this. It says, those who linger long at the wine, they go in search of mixed wine, something stronger. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly. And what it's talking about is a pure wine as opposed to a watered down, diluted wine. I'm only making the case is that Jesus drank wine. They all drank wine. You watch The Chosen. They're all sitting there drinking the wine at the wedding party at Cana. Right, but they were watered down wines. And so 8 Passover wines is 2 cups of regular wine today. And most of us in the room, I'm not giving real limits, but you get what I'm saying. Like most of us probably could drink 2 cups, and depending, you might have minimal, you might have a lot, but the idea is 1 or 2 cups of wine, and it's like a lot of people might call that in the whatever zone. I don't drink it all, but I'm just saying like that's the, so you have to think these guys could drink 8 cups of wine before you're at today's 1 or 2 cup level. So it's just food for thought when you see people drinking the Bible. You have to remember things were different back then. In closing, I just want to read 7 to 12. He who corrects a scoffer gets shame for himself, and he rebukes the wicked, man only harms himself. Do not correct a scoffer lest he hate you. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you. If you're going to call out someone, it's worth you just thinking like, are they going to receive what I'm going to give them? If I know for a fact they're just going to reject it, don't waste your time. It says, give instruction to a wise man, he will still be wiser. Teach a just man, he will increase in learning. For the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For by me your days will be multiplied, and your years of life will be added to you. If you are wise for yourself, and if you scoff, you will bear it alone. So that is the end of the first section of Proverbs. And next week, as we continue starting in chapter 10, this is where a lot of what I'd call our traditional Proverbs are. This, the quick boom, 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 topic to topic, lots of little stuff. And I've already said it once tonight, but I'm going to say it again, that I really do hope and pray that you guys will treat the content of tonight seriously, especially for the younger married people. Especially for the single young man, the almost married. Like, this is a serious threat, and strong men fall. Much stronger than you and stronger than me. And so if I feel for a moment that I'm above this, that's the exact attitude that gets us caught in it. And so with humility, I'd like to worship the Lord and ask him for protection, for wisdom, for guidance, that he'd bless the marriages in the church, that husbands and wives would be showing due affection to one another and truly thinking of the needs of the other and putting the other above themselves. Rather than thinking about what my needs are, thinking about what are their needs and how can I continue to pour into them those things that they need and desire. So let's get the lights. Let's get some time just to worship and pray and ask God to bless us.